Charlie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Here we are, 100 days after GDPR's arrival. Interested to know, from a litigator's perspective, what are you seeing? What are the main changes?
More work. Yeah. So obviously, because of the mandatory reporting requirements under GDPR, the higher fines, there's increased risk, and so companies are being far more conservative typically in their approach to assessing whether or not incidents are, for example, notifiable to the regulators. So we are getting a lot more approaches from companies with potential problems, potential data security breaches and incidents, asking for help in investigating and advice on whether or not to notify. We're also seeing more subject access requests coming through under the new GDPR regime, often by vexatious individuals as a precursor to litigation. So there's been a big uptick in work since 25 May. I'd say we've probably dealt with around 20 incidents in the last couple of months or so.
Interesting. And going back to that point, if we may, around the query about a possible problem and should we not notify, seems to be an increasing challenge. How's that panning out? Are we getting any clearer to understanding where that line is between something that does need to be notified and something that does need to be notified to regulators?
Not really. I mean, there's a huge amount of guidance on this, obviously. One key part of the GDPR test, so you have to notify a personal data breach within 72 hours.
And what about this 72-hour thing, having to notify in 72 hours? Sounds like there's loads of time, but is that enough?
It's as tough a time frame as we all thought it was going to be in the run-up to GDPR coming into place. So 72 hours is a ridiculously, often impossibly tight time frame within which to investigate, bottom out, understand, and then notify a complex cyber incident. It's just not doable. But companies should take heart from the fact there's still a degree of flexibility in the system and in the rules. So the obligation to notify, the 72-hour clock, only really starts to tick from the point at which you become reasonably certain that a personal data breach has occurred. And often you can't be certain for a while until you've conducted some forensic investigation. So there is often a basis on which to say the clock isn't yet ticking. And even when it is ticking, if you can't bottom out the incident fully within 72 hours, it's perfectly acceptable to send a preliminary notification to the regulator saying, there's been an incident, here's what we know so far, it's complicated, we're still investigating, we'll come back to you soon.
So essentially stages, as
Exactly.
it were? Okay. And in terms of some of those points you raised around cyber risk and general breach risk, any sort of top tips for mitigating those problems for businesses?
Well, there are many, many things you can do, obviously, from both a technical and an organisational perspective to try and hedge against the risk. But one key takeaway would be to conduct a very comprehensive, thorough risk assessment of your personal data, your crown jewels, where it sits, what you've got, where the key risks are, and then have in place a crisis or incident detection and response policy that is really, really simple and also focused at the risks that you've identified, and then to rehearse that. There's no point having a bit of paper that says what you do in a crisis if you haven't practiced that internally. And also with your supply chain, if you have a complex supply chain.
And so that's a really interesting point. It's something we're definitely seeing a lot more of, this breach response plan activity. Any key thoughts or takeaways for what that plan should include or what it should look like?
Keep it simple. That is the absolute golden rule. Nobody has the time or the inclination to read a 10, 20-page dense plan in the event of a crisis. You've got to keep it really simple, distill things down to key checklist points, mobile friendly ideally, so people can just access it on the mobile, key do's and don'ts, who to call, who not to call, simple as that.
And one final question, looking at it from the other end of the telescope, from the regulator, from the Information Commissioner's perspective in the UK, do we have a sense to where their focus is at the moment and where we're seeing them really putting their attention post May 25th? Yeah,
they've recently announced that they're going to be focusing, amongst other things, on the most egregious data security breaches involving very, very large numbers of data subjects and or very sensitive information. So that's going to be one area of focus. Anything involving children, I think, will be another area of focus for them. So those are two key areas to watch out for. But I think you need to bear in mind that if you're an international business trading across Europe, the ICA obviously has a number of sister regulators across Europe, each of which have or tend to have slightly different areas of priority and focus. So it's worth bearing in mind if you are trading across borders.
Great, okay. Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thanks for having me.